Good morning, everyone. Welcome to session W107, Cyber Update, what to do before, during, and after an attack. My name is Amy Hazelton. I work with the General Services Administration, and I am so excited to be with all of you today to host an incredible panel of experts and to really get a great conversation going relative to cybersecurity. Because as we all know, cybersecurity is in fact a game the whole family can and should play. We've got good friends and family helping us navigate today, so I'd like to have us move to our next slide so we can get started on the conversation. Again, to drill home what the purpose and content of our discussion is going to be today, we're going to focus on having a conversation about the strategic, tactical, organizational, and technical actions that individuals, organizations can take to help reduce risk, and in particular, aid in the preparedness and responsiveness to address a cyber event. We can go to the next slide, please. So why does cybersecurity make good sense? We tackled this topic in the 2019 session, and we focused on a number of key reasons why cybersecurity does in fact make good sense. Frankly, and most importantly, cybersecurity can affect the entirety of your enterprise from a business perspective, from a mission critical perspective, certainly from a financial perspective, credibility perspective, and then of course, recognizing that information is one of our most precious resources. It can affect the security and availability and accuracy of that data. So we want to keep those reasons in mind. It's also important to think about, and we reflected upon this last year, that when you consider the range and of functions that we take to ensure that we have a strong cybersecurity framework, being able to identify risks, cybersecurity risks, protect against those cybersecurity intrusions, detect them when they happen, respond to them, and then recover from them is cyclical in nature, similar to the way in which we think about enterprise risk. We need to understand our risk appetite and have a strategy toward it, enhance our responsiveness, make sure that we can reduce the potential for operational surprises and losses. When it happens, be able to identify, manage, and handle multiple cross-agency or cross-enterprise risks, seize opportunities to improve upon our existing footprint, and then ensure that when a event takes place, when any type of risk takes place, we're able to improve and ensure effective deployment of our capital resources to address the challenge. Next slide, please. Last summer, we talked again about the importance of cybersecurity, and we were with a panel of about 4 experts, and they shared with us some key tips about cybersecurity and cyber hygiene. I'm not going to go through the totality of those today, but I do want to drill home one key theme, and that theme is that all of our panelists, and I believe you'll hear this again today, talked about the importance of integrating cybersecurity and a cybersecurity strategy as an integral part of your business framework, as an integral part of the way you execute mission, as an integrated part of your financial, technical, programmatic operations. The more that you build cybersecurity into the fabric of what you do and ensure that every individual at all parts of the organization has cyber awareness, feels empowered to alert and make others aware when there is a potential change or a potential attack, the better those folks are empowered to understand and take action, the better prepared you will be, your organization will be, to address whatever happens to come next. And mark our words today, it is coming if it is not here already. Cybersecurity is an ongoing opportunity, an ongoing challenge, and really an ongoing engagement in the way in which we think about our program, our mission, our financial portfolio, our information security, and our just general day-to-day stewardship of our resources. Next slide, please. We do at the AGA focus a lot on cybersecurity, and our AGA colleagues have pulled together something called a Cyber Hub. I've provided to you the link in the slide. Hopefully y'all can see it. This provides you with a link to a number of different resources that are both internal to AGA and in particular external to AGA, including our intergovernmental partners as well as industry. Most recently, if you've had a chance to visit the site, you'll see that we have provided 2 particular documents for your review and comment. They're in draft on the AGA Cyber Hub. There's a cyber Q&A document as well as a cyber tips document. We encourage you to take a quick look at those. If you've got any feedback for us, please, please, please let us know. Again, your engagement is what helps to make that content better. If we could go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, we have an incredible panel of experts that span federal, state, and local experience. I'm going to turn to each of them and ask them briefly to introduce themselves. My good friends and panelists, if you could say who you are, what you do, and one thing you're excited about for this panel. Beth, could we please start with you?
Sure. So thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here. My name is Beth Ann Kaloran, and I am the Deputy Chief Information Officer for the General Services Administration. I have been in that role for about 2 years. Prior to that, I was the CIO at Health and Human Services for about 3 years of the 4 years that I've been there, but I have over 25 years of federal experience in IT and have had both a positive and a negative experience around cybersecurity. So happy to share some of those experiences with our audience today.
Great. Thank you so much, Beth. Appreciate it. All right, Jenny, next up, hailing from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Please introduce yourself, my friend.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. Jenny Hederman, State Risk Counsel at the Comptroller's Office of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Like Beth, I have many decades of experience. I'm going on 31 years with Commonwealth experience. And right now, my focus is on risk and internal controls and cybersecurity for the Comptroller's Office and our 152 agencies that are all in the same boat as you are dealing with cybersecurity.
Great. Jenny, thank you so much. Appreciate you joining today. And I believe we have our good friend Sarah Cunningham from North Carolina. Sarah, would you please feel free to introduce yourself as well?
Good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm Sarah Cunningham. Oh, hello? Can you hear me now? Okay.
You got it.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Cunningham. I'm the CFO for Mecklenburg County. I've been here for about 2.5 years, and that's coming off about 14 years with the federal government and a few years in the private sector. So like our other panelists, I've got years of experience and exposure to cybersecurity and information technology from a range of different perspectives. Also have lived through a cyber attack within my first 3 weeks on the job and my current job with Mecklenburg County. So I'm really excited to be able to share some of those experiences and get some, hopefully some good dialogue with the rest of you on what are the things we can do to be proactive.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Sarah. So for all of our audience participants, one of the most exciting things about this panel is they have decades and decades of experience in the topic. Additionally, the panel brings to the conversation today some very real world experience. And I think the first piece of thinking through that real world experience is that all of them have lived to tell about it. So not only is it possible to have a cyber event happen, but it's possible to live through that and learn from that and ultimately thrive. So we'll look forward to getting that conversation started. And if we might, we'll go ahead and turn straight to our questions. If we could have the next slide, please. So again, we're going to look at the conversation for cybersecurity from the federal, state, and local perspective. We've got 3 key questions we're going to focus our panelists on, and we're going to rotate the discussion across the panelists. But as you will hear through their discussion and through their dialogue, there will be sort of 3 major areas you'll hear commentary. Certainly, you'll hear commentary on the technical importance of activities that go into cybersecurity and understanding your technical environment, your technical framework, your technical vulnerabilities, your technical debt. We'll also probably hear some commentary as well about some of the legal implications when a cyber event happens. What do you need to do? How do you protect your assets? What actions do you need to take to ensure that your risk profile, your risk management is not just an adjunct function, but something built into the fabric of the program? And then you'll probably hear some dialogue as well about the impact to organization. What do organizations do at all walks of the organization, in all parts of the organization, to really make cybersecurity a holistic and consistent and comprehensive part of the business operations of the programs? So we're looking forward to that conversation. We're going to start off with our very first question. And Beth, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to take that. For the good of the audience, I'll go ahead and read the question out. And then Beth, I'm going to ask you to start us off. And then perhaps I'll have Jenny, you chime in after that. And then Sarah, I'll have you take it across the goal line on just question 1. So for our audience today, our first question is, how does your perspective or your experience on cyber matters change or evolve when you've had the opportunity, shall we say, to face a cyber event? What are some actions and steps that are key to being prepared and preparing for future cyber events? And what are some actions and steps that are key to responding? So Beth, I'm going to have you start us off, and we look forward to it. Go for it, Beth.
Great. Thank you. So I actually have lived through 3 major cyber events while I was at Health and Human Services, each one of them being very different in nature. But every one of them, whether it was something like a global event like a Pecha or a WannaCry, to a very localized event with some data that was stolen, each one of them, when you're in an event, the first and most important thing is to recover, which is how do you get back to those normal operations and get people back to work as quickly as possible, right? And how do you do that? Then the next piece of that is investigation of what happened and to what extent did this particular event impact your systems and individuals, because you need to make sure that you're putting things in place to protect the privacy of the individuals, and if there's any protections and things you need to put in place. So after you've recovered, you need to go in, find out the totality of the information, the individuals that were impacted, and what particular steps you need to have to recover not only the data in the systems, but the protection of your individuals. What you should be doing so that you can respond more quickly is, what kind of things are you doing proactively to prevent a cyber event from occurring? How can you minimize those impacts? What kinds of things are you doing to understand the trends? What can you actually be putting in place technology-wise and training of your individuals and employees? So not only do you can identify events very quickly, but do the best you can to prevent them in the future. And what you have to do, both from a technology perspective, what kind of guardrails and should you be putting around your systems to protect them? And what do you really have as your priority systems and priority data, so you make sure that you're putting the most security around those capabilities? And how can you make sure that you understand if something actually has been attacked or potentially being in the process of being attacked? So the best thing that you can kind of do is put those capabilities in place and then test them, making sure that you're running scenarios, that you're putting all the people in place that you need to actually check with, whether that is your communications folks, your cyber employees, your executive leadership, your business units. All of those people need to be in place, because the worst thing you want to figure out during a cyber event is who do you need to have in a room, who do you need to be getting in touch with, and how do you do that? And I can tell you firsthand, the first time I had to go through one, we literally had to have the highest executive leadership of the agency in a room every day because we had no idea. And that's not the right answer. So you want to do these scenario planning as much as you can with real world types of capabilities, so that you can walk through those events, because this is not a matter of if a cyber event will happen. It is a matter of when, and you can put as many protections as you can as possible, but you will have to make sure that at some point you are able to execute when a cyber event occurs.
That's great, Beth. Thank you for that. So a couple key takeaways from those remarks is you need to make sure you know who's going to be in the room when it happens. Secondarily, the more you test, plan, rinse and repeat, the better prepared you are when something does in fact go down. So thanks for that, Beth. Jenny, welcome your perspective on this.
I second everything that Beth has said. It's so important. And I think that if anything that I could help those that are listening is that cybersecurity is not, you don't look at it as being overwhelming. It really can be dealt with in a very simple way if you treat it as part of your operations. And what we found with some of the cyber events in Massachusetts, they've been small, primarily at universities, is the 3 things that really helped are having an inventory. And people don't really regard inventory as being very important. I think that inventory has turned out to be one of the most important things you can do in your organization, which is knowing everything that you have, all of your equipment, whether it's local or remote, your networks, all your applications, your hosted sites, your cloud, your third-party vendors, and really documenting it in a central place where you have access to all of that. If you have a cyber event, that's the first thing that you have to look at in trying to remediate an event. And if you don't have that readily available or it's not up to date, it's going to slow down your ability to get back up and running. So that's something that is one of the most important things. Second thing is your IT staff really needs to be part of your operational decision making. And this is something that we did at the Comptroller's Office, which was critical when we were dealing with the pandemic. We had no downtime. We were able to keep everything operating because our IT staff was integrated in with all the decision making. And that's something that's been done for a long time, and it made a huge difference in our ability to be able to communicate the technology, the operations, the legal, the policy, all of those issues in a way that people understood. So that's a second thing. The third thing is building your team of communication and also having members from across your agency, not just relying on your IT staff to take on the load. They're going to communicate in a certain way, but you have to have fiscal, you have to have legal policy, you really have to have, as Beth said, a team, and then do cross-training amongst them. And our IT director had said, have more than one person do certain skills across your units so that if something comes up, they've already done a triage because they know how to do multiple things. So that's part of the testing that you can do. So those would be the three recommendations I would make for planning ahead.
That's great. I love the importance of understanding that your IT team needs to be part of just the team, that they are critical and integral members of the broader conversation and need to be brought in, not just when the crisis happens, but at a regular routine basis. So they understand what you do, why you do it, why it's important, and the whole context. So great. Thanks for that, Jenny. If I might turn to you, Sarah, any reactions that you would like to share from that local perspective or amplifications for Jenny or Beth's commentary made earlier?
Yep, absolutely. I think I second everything Beth said and everything Jenny said as well. This is especially kind of going back to it's something where you can plan for it. I think one of my big takeaways from the event that we had in Mecklenburg County was not just a cyber attack will happen, but when it does, that strong leadership and having already done some planning and being able to have a quick response in advance really makes all the difference to being able to respond. And really, it's preparation is truly an exercise in enterprise risk management. As Jenny outlined, having an inventory of the IT assets. What are your IT assets? Why are they important? How do they feed into your mission? Who is using those assets and how? Not just within your organization, but what are those key stakeholders that need to have an understanding of where things are? Evaluating that IT asset through a risk management framework. And just as Jenny and Beth have outlined, it really requires having everybody at the table. Critical, you have to have your business owners there. They're the ones who are going to be able to say best, here's how it feeds into the mission, as well as IT, finance, and leadership. You got to be able to answer some basic questions as part of this preparation. Not only what are the most critical systems, how can the technology help? What do the different technology solutions or options mean for the business operation? Because at the end of the day, the only way to be 100% cyber secure is not to be connected at all. So is the solution worse than the cure? You need to be able to balance that. And this will give you what you need to be able to identify what is the appetite your organization has to avoid, mitigate, transfer, or accept risks. And it's that planning and that discussion that will really help you be most prepared for the inevitable when a cyber event happens. I think just to underscore again, education is the most important. As everybody said, everyone in the organization needs to be enlisted in the effort, and they need to know how important they are to be on the front line of cybersecurity and what it means for the mission, not just the system, but what it means to delivering services to the public. Having your backup plan and practicing it, this is your coup. Being able to say, just as folks have outlined, what are the possible scenarios? If the systems are down, what are your manual processes? Do you have paper checks? What are your controls? From a local government perspective, where the vast majority of our work is delivering the service on the front line, we need to be able to have that backup plan because we can't just shut our doors on health and human services. We can't just shut our doors on law enforcement, public safety, and residents of our detention facilities. We need to be able to figure out how to make it work when the system isn't there. And then also not being afraid to take your experiences with real life situations that are similar to help inform and do some continuous improvements on that COOPS planning. What we're going through right now with COVID, everybody's had to move 100% remote from having, that going into the office every day. We've changed a lot. There's some really good learning in that you can apply to thinking through, well, what are ways that I could be more cyber secure, as folks have outlined, by integrating that as part of your business operation.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah, for that. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the importance and frankly, part of why we're here at PDT is the education, is the awareness. And the more everyone is educated about what is possible, why it happens, and how they can prepare and respond, the better position the organization is, definitely. Let's go ahead and move to question 2. And Jenny, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and start us off with this one. And I'll read it out again for the audience to help ensure folks are tracking with us here. So we've talked a little bit about what do we need to do to be prepared. But this question focuses on the fact that a cyber event has just happened and your organization's got to figure out, how do I shift from this crisis response mode to my regular operations? What is life? What is my new normal going to be? So Jenny, if you would start us off on this, and then Beth, Sarah, I'll have you chime in, and Beth, I'm going to have you take us across the goal line. And then we want to make sure we get through this question with enough time to hit one more, and then we'll go into the audience dialogue. Jenny, over to you, please.
Great. Thank you. And I also have 3 items here for this that will help. And this is based on the cyber events that we had and what we learned from the experts going through that. So the first one is having access to cyber experts or consultants who really specialize in remediating events. In Massachusetts, we have a statewide contract. We have contractors ready to go, and we've actually used them. And they, the requirement is their boots on the ground, either same day or within 24 hours, and they've been very successful in doing that. The benefit of that is you bring in skills that assist you in identifying where really to look for how to remediate. And they look into your systems, they have the technology, they have the skills. And that's really important to have that support when you're dealing with it. The second part is convening your incident team. It's really not just individual people reacting. It's really getting people on the phone, getting them in a room, and really talking through the process and understanding what type of situation are you in. Do you have a system disruption? Do you have a phishing attempt and you really don't know? Are you dealing with ransomware? It's really identifying where you are, and then identifying, do we have health and safety risks? Do we have technology issues where we're just not operational? What do we do with our staff? So it's really being able to bring those key staff in and triaging it, and then parceling out who does what, and then keeping that communication going. So that team really is important. And even if you haven't put the team together before, putting that team together and keeping that team together and the communication amongst that team consistent is really important. And the third thing I think we found is one of the most important things, and we learned this from our cyber expert, is documentation. When you get into an emergency, it's really hard to remember to document. But what we learned is documentation is part of the remediation. And it's not just this is what happened. It's every single detail about what they looked at, the process they went through to figure out where infections were, where viruses or malware was stored. In most of the cases, the universities had excellent IT staff. They found 90% of the infection, but it was the consultants who came in after, and they found more that was just kind of sitting and nobody could find because they had the skills and technology. So that was really important. And also presume that you're going to get audited. Even if you're in an emergency, even during the pandemic, you are going to get audited on this eventually. So you have to think about it from an accounting and an audit standpoint, which is documenting all the information so that when somebody comes back and they challenge the decisions that you made in an emergency situation, you're going to have documented why it was a good business decision to do what you did and the steps that you took. And also on the second part, when you're doing your debrief and you're really building your lessons learned and redoing your disaster recovery plan and your business continuity plan and building new protocols, you need to have these notes and this information to assist in doing that. So those would be the 3 recommendations I would make when you're in the midst of it.
Great. I really appreciate that. It's great. Thank you for that, Jenny. And I hear very loud and clear documentation, be prepared for what comes next, the rearview mirror look by our audit community colleagues, and certainly key team play, key team effort. Sarah, what other thoughts would you like to share on this particular topic, action steps, and maybe 2 or 3 that you think are most critical after the events occurred and as you prepare to resume this? And then I'm going to have Beth, you wrap this question up and take us across the goal line.
Yeah,
Sarah?
I think Jenny did an excellent job of going over most of the things that I would have pulled up. I think can underscore number 1, getting help. The first thing you need to do is make sure that you're calling on all of your resources, your insurance, your forensic advisors, the federal government, the state government, assembling that team you need, as both Benny and Jenny and Beth have outlined. You need to be able to get them there so that you can get the advice you need to respond. Number 2 is have a communication plan. We are in positions of public trust. You need to be able to communicate with your stakeholders the appropriate information, but make sure that they're in the loop. In 2014, both Target and Home Depot had major data breaches. Home Depot's was much worse, but Target got hammered much more. The difference? Home Depot had a strong communication plan with stakeholders that they had set up front. So this is really critical for us, particularly at the local government level, where we're delivering that face-to-face service most often. Executing your COOP, making sure that you're getting that assessment from your business owners, from your business areas. What is happening to them? What do they need? Being able to take that information in real time and put it into your response strategy, because at the end of the day, recovery is more than just turning on the systems. It's the ability to make sure you're able to get back to the mission and you're able to do so securely.
Thanks so much for that, Sarah. Appreciate it. Beth, final thoughts on this particular question?
I think that Jenny and Sarah did a great job. The only other kind of aspect I would think about, and I think Sarah's kind of alluding to this, is as you are resuming normal operations, you really need to think about your reputation as an organization, because now you have some level of trust that has been broken by your constituents that you serve, whoever that might happen to be. And so that level of communication and what you could show you're now doing proactively as you resume those in operations to prevent such a type of event moving forward. Goes back to both what Jenny and Sarah were saying is that your organization might have had a higher risk tolerance prior to the event, and the likelihood you're going to have a lower level of risk tolerance afterwards. And then what you're going to do, not only from a brand perspective to get your brand recognition and trust back, but also from an investment perspective, because some of the things that you might have invested in and how you invested in cyber protection prior to event is probably going to be altered. So thinking about how you're going to shift and what kind of capabilities you think you need to proactively put in place when you're back to a normal operation should also be considered.
That's great. Awesome. Thank you again for that. All right, we are going to wrap up our panel part of our conversation with one last question, and then audience members. While we can't see you, we're definitely looking forward to hearing from you. So be prepared to transition into an audience dialogue here shortly. Sarah, I'd like to direct this last question to you, and then we'll circle back and have Beth follow up, and Jenny will help us go straight across that goal line. So we've talked about the preparedness aspect. We've talked about the fact that now the events occurred, you're getting ready to resume normal operations. This last question is really sort of down the line. So you've had the event, you resumed operations, life is floating along, things are good. How do you create the energy, the sustainability of a cyber strategy so that it isn't just a emergency response posture, but that it is truly incorporated? And if you could identify maybe 2 or 3 key recommendations, then we'll go to Beth and then we'll go to Jenny to complete us out.
Yep, I think in overview, it really goes back to how you started the session, Amy. It's really about integrating cyber into every day. It's not a separate item. Technology is increasingly the way that we're delivering business, especially in finance. It's core to our mission, and it shouldn't be a standalone exercise. Taking an ERM approach, even if you don't have a program, do the work, identify your mission, What are the cyber risks that could get in the way? And what is your strategy to respond? If you have these questions framed and you have the business owners at the table, they're thinking about it from a mission-centric perspective and better able to give input into what we need, not only to be secure, but to make sure we're able to make that mission move forward. And that can bring its own energy because you've got people at the table problem solving together. Educate and test your organization. If you have cyber insurance, they can do an evaluation. They can come in and say where some of your gaps are. You can also work with your IT to have phishing and other tests. Test your staff. If they're clicking on fake emails that we send out from our CIO and they're falling for phishing simulations, they'll fall for it in real life. So being able to take that information, build that into not just build that in intentionally into the everyday so people can be more aware. I think would be the three things I would recommend.
That's great. Thanks so much, Sarah. Beth, commentary, implications, additional thoughts?
I think that I would echo what Sarah says. I mean, thinking about cybersecurity, it isn't a add-on. We've been doing in business controls and quality controls as part of the business in its totality. Cyber is that similar kind of aspect. You're working to reduce the risk of your business being able to be productive and provide value to your customers, whomever they are. And so what we have to do is make sure that our employees and the citizens using our systems understand that, are making sure that as part of their business operations and what they need to do in their everyday jobs, has that aspect of those kind of key performance metrics that they're working towards to make sure that they can do the job that they are and supportive of. So how do we do that? And making sure that we're doing not only that education, but to Sarah's point, how are we doing it? How do we have independent teams coming and looking for these problems so that we are kind of finding the issues before somebody exploits them? How are we making sure that we're checking on our folks to see where we need to understand where we might need to do some other education? And I think third, it's how are we keeping up with the trends of cyber threats and making sure that we're proactively adjusting our cyber posture so that we're, if it's phishing today and maybe it's malware tomorrow and then the next day it might be ransomware, how are we shifting the tools and things that we're putting in place from a monitoring perspective so that we can keep up to date with the threats as they emerge and change?
Right. So I'm hearing that it really does need to be a holistic approach in the go forward, particularly in order to sustain it. Technology, organizational dynamics, experts, and really ensuring that you have a holistic strategy of that. So thank you for that, Beth. Jenny, let's go to you and have you help us take this last question across the goal line from your vantage point. Key recommendations that would be helpful in ensuring a sustainable cybersecurity strategy.
Right. I think that it's building a philosophy of cybersecurity and communication in the agency as part of your operation. I mean, that's the most important. I think I welcome folks to look at the comptroller's office in Massachusetts. We have a cyber center that we built, and it was really just to provide a lot of information for our agencies and for employees to be able to understand that cyber was really part of their day-to-day business. We also do a weekly cyber tip, and that is to remind all state employees that this is something that's coming up, things of interest, alerts that are coming up, things they can do like strong passwords, their Wi-Fi connections, and to prevent the cyber fatigue, which is if they hear about it too much, then they're just going to not pay attention to it. So we try to do it periodically so that they are hearing the most important things, but it's done in really, really simple, short pieces of information so they don't get overload. The other recommendation is to run simulations. And this is something that just takes time, but as part of your regular meetings, the question to ask is, if your technology is down, how are you going to get critical tasks done? And actually talk in detail about, okay, what is your plan B? What is your plan C? If you lose half your staff and your staff is unable to work, how do you get the other half up and working and able to get your business done? So it's having these conversations. They don't have to be very formal. They can be informal conversations just to get people thinking about what happens if we don't have the technology working as well as it needs to be. And then how are we going to do it? And when you start thinking about it, that really helps start identifying where your weak points are, where your biggest risks are, and then how to put things in place to mitigate it. And then the third thing is I can't recommend enough having independent experts to help you, because sometimes they can come in and look at what you're doing and identify these are the most important things you need to be paying attention to, the biggest risks. And sometimes management wants an independent evaluation to second or support what you're doing. So I think having experts coming in and being partners in this process is really critical. And also you're going to get the most current information. It takes a lot of research, and it's hitting the internet every single day. There's new things coming up. So having experts there that you can call upon to bounce ideas off of and get the most current information is definitely a worthy investment. So those would be my recommendations.
That's great. Thank you very much. And panelists, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your experiences with our audience today. I'm going to go ahead and call in a colleague, Mr. Mark Rieger, to help us see if we've got any questions in our queue. And I'd ask us to just shift to the next slide, please, because we would like to spend, as soon as the slide flips, we would like to spend time with an audience conversation. So Monica, if you could turn to the next slide. And Mark, do you have any questions that may be in the queue for us? If you could read a question out, then I'll direct it to a particular panelist.
I do. Thanks, Amy. The first question I think applies to everybody on the panel, so maybe you could just run through. It said, how would I know I have been attacked? What traces would I find on my computer? So maybe you could go through and just say, how did you find out?
That's great, Mark. Thank you for that. So Beth, why don't I ask you to start us off of that, particularly given your tremendously strong technical background. What would be your quick reaction to that? And then Jenny and Sarah, if you've got additional commentary, we can chime in right after. Beth, start us off, please.
So there are really three primary ways that I know of that you can identify if you've been attacked. So one is there are monitoring tools and logs on your computers and servers, and all of these different transactions that are happening on your system are logged into whether the monitoring tools or the logs. And usually the first thing you do is you data mine that information to actually go through it and see what actually has a transaction. The second area would be is there are specific malware that, known bad to apply, and you would look for that malware on your device as well, because the likelihood if you have this malware, the likelihood level of compromise. The third is data exfiltration, which is if you have servers and data repositories, if you see large volumes of data have been copied, in which you can see in the logs, or actually just see data moving through your network, and you have no understanding of why that data is moving, the likelihood that someone is taking something just based on bulk kind of copies moves is another area. So one would be logs and monitoring, two would be malware identification, and three would be data exfiltration.
Great. Jenny or Sarah, any quick adds to that initial response?
Maybe one add I would make is that you're not going to necessarily know you have malware on your system. Sometimes there's no glitch, your operations are working fine. So I totally agree with Beth that you have to have monitoring software. You have to have something in place that's going to be looking for this type of malware, because a lot of times it just sits and waits and gathers information on what your staff are doing and uses that information to then mount an event.
Great. Thanks, Jenny.
Yep, I think the only thing that I would add is more of a preparation. One of the big lessons learned that we had through our event was making sure that we were vigilant in constantly reviewing and updating who had access to what systems. If someone changes jobs, if a process changes, making sure that you've got that, because that'll really enable your IT through those monitoring to see whether or not something looks funny.
That's great. Thank you for that. Mark, well, let's see what else we've got in the queue. Thank you, panelists, for that initial round. Mark, what's next?
So the second question that has the most score is, what would be your top 3 recommendations to prepare for a cyber incident or national or local event?
That's great. Thanks, Mark, for that. Sarah, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to kick off a comment on this one, and then we'll turn to Jenny and Beth as needed for additional amplification. Would you take this on that one, Sarah?
Yep, I think it goes back to the top three is, as both Jenny and Beth have said, being able to have that inventory of your IT assets, knowing who uses them, why are they important to whom, and using a risk management framework to really prioritize and identify what is your strategy in the event that there's an attack that compromises one, not just from a cyber perspective, but from a business perspective, having those conversations integrated in your day-to-day. I think the second piece that we've emphasized is really the education, and it's not just education at the top level, and here's what might happen, but it's making sure that that goes throughout the whole organization and they understand their role. And then, as folks have outlined, having that backup plan and practicing it. It doesn't necessarily need a lot of money to run drills. You can do kind of short-term desk scenarios in staff meetings with your staff and saying, hey, what if this happens? What would we do? How would we react? There can be ways you can incorporate continuous learning and discussion so that when the unthinkable does happen, because it will, you've already had the preparation of thinking through what your actions might be.
Awesome. Awesome. Jenny, any other reactions? And then Beth.
Those are definitely my top three. The only other one I would add, as we mentioned before, is invest in having cyber experts, because sometimes a 10-minute phone call is going to save you hundreds of hours of work. So, definitely build a relationship with some cyber experts that you can rely on.
So I'd agree with all those. The only other one I would add is making sure you understand the totality of your community. And what I mean by that is, so when we had the Petya and WannaCry, it wasn't just our agency, it wasn't just our organization, but it was the totality of the healthcare. And what actually was happening, I mean, there were actual hospitals around the country that were having issues. So being able to tap into that totality of the community and be able to communicate as much as you can in real time, so that everybody has the same information, so that they can make those real-time decisions as they have those recovery plans and kind of procedures they have in place. So making sure you have built that network in the totality of your communication network prior to an event is really important.
Hey, Amy.
Yes.
There's another question that I think I'd like to know, and I'm thinking lots of people who haven't been through these ladies' experiences might like. How did you decide whether to pay the ransom? And was it a risk-based decision? How many of you were attacked and chose to pay the first time?
So let's go ahead and see, first of all, if any of our panelists, Beth or Jenny or Sarah, have been in a position where that has been requested, and then we'll let that individual take that off. Beth or Jenny?
So, I mean, we had ransomware attacks, but they were on individual desktops, not at huge enterprise systems. And I would say we definitely chose not to pay the ransom. We realistically just took those individual devices offline, pretty much took them right down to the bare bones and rebuilt them versus obviously paying any type of ransom.
Great, thanks. Yeah. Jenny or Sarah?
Jenny, did you want her?
And the Commonwealth hasn't had large incidents of ransomware attacks. The ones that I'm aware of on local government, it really depends on the circumstance. In some cases, they paid the ransomware and the data they came back was corrupted, so it was unusable. And then, a lot of the insurance companies now are going to require you to pay the ransomware as part of the cost because it's less cost for them. So my recommendation would be, instead of focusing on whether you pay or not, is to really focus on having really good backups that are done so that you don't have to pay the ransomware, so that you have such good data that you've tested recovering it so that you don't have to pay. As Beth said, you can just take, different networks and different PCs offline and just re-image them. That's my biggest recommendation, is if you have a really good backup plan and your data's done and it's current, you're not going to have to pay the ransomware.
Great, thank you. Sarah, any final thoughts on this one?
I think just given our experience in Mecklenburg County, where we ended up in the New York Times for choosing not to pay the ransom, it goes back to exactly what Jenny and Beth have said. You got to have your backup systems. That's going to be what gives you your option. And if you get the help, you assemble your team immediately so you can assess the situation, be able to understand what the implications are. That's really what we did and how we were able to make the determination that in our case, it didn't make sense to pay the ransom, because at the end of the day, we were likely to only have to worry about reinfection or things like that. So we were able to build a plan that worked better for us without the ransom. But different local governments, especially those that might have very different resources or technology levels, face very different circumstances. So it really depends on your organization and what's going on the ground.
That's great. Well, I think that's what we have time for in terms of the audience discussion. Again, thanks for all the great questions. I wish that we could keep talking forever. I wish that we could depart from the virtual room and end up in a virtual coffee area, but we cannot, and I want to make sure we get everybody out on time. So if we could turn to the next slide, and we'll do our wrap up, which poses one last question to our good friends and panelists. So Monica, that would be great. Thank you. So in this order, Beth, Jenny, and Sarah, I'm going to ask you for 3 words. They can be compound words, they can be big words or small words, but words that you choose to best characterize a strong cybersecurity or a strong cyber strategy program. So the way you might phrase it is, the 3 words I would use that to best characterize a strong cybersecurity or cyber strategy program are ... Beth, let's start with you.
So in the world of COVID, I picked PPE, but my PPE is different. It's people, protection, and endurance.
Terrific. Wonderful. I love it. All right, Jenny, fill in the blanks. So 3 words to best characterize a strong cybersecurity and strategy or program, they would be?
A solid team, inventory, and patching and updates.
Love it. Terrific. Thank you for that. Sarah, 3 words that you would identify to help best characterize a strong cybersecurity strategy program. What would they be?
Mission-centric, strategic, and evolving.
Terrific. Well, I just want to make sure we say thank you to everyone that is in the room where it has happened. We want and hope that as you continue about the PDT, that you find the sessions informative, exciting, inspirational, and certainly as you are carrying out your day-to-day life during this remarkable time in our country, that you and your loved ones and family, friends, etc., stay safe and well and healthy. As we wrap up today's discussion, some of the key takeaways I would just share from my vantage point as your moderator, for which I am quite grateful. Some of the key themes I've heard are team. There is no I in team, but there is an T in cybersecurity, and that T definitely should stand for team. It does take a team to make things happen. It takes a team to respond, team of experts, teams, cross-organizational, cross-programmatic individuals. So that would be one key theme as we think through this. P for preparedness. Absolutely. The more you plan, the more you prepare, and the more you practice, the better off you are when something can or does happen. Third, I would say documentation with an eye toward lending real world experience and capturing that so that it is saved over time, so that lessons can be learned and new and innovative strategies can be incorporated. So documentation, I think, is equally critical. And then finally, and part of, again, why we are all joined here today is the importance of education and awareness. And one of the last questions we talked about, education and awareness, and what I've heard through the panel and even in some of the conversation with all of you today, is that education and awareness maybe starts at home, but it does need to be expanded such that your key stakeholders are aware, you understand the impact of a cyber event on those key stakeholders, you have a strong communication strategy to ensure effective dialogue when it happens, what you're doing when it happens, how you're responding and preparing for resuming normal operations, and then what life will be like once you have in fact recovered, and how you rebuild that community and that credibility in the go forward. So again, very strong importance to focus on that communication across the board. With that in mind, I do want to take a moment and thank 3 extraordinary panelists. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it. Mark, quick shout out to you, my friend. Great job in reading those questions. You could have your own talk show host. You're so good. So thank you for that. Thanks as well to our AGA team that has supported this particular session. We appreciate your technical skill in helping bring this panel together. And then finally, our thanks to all of our audience attendees. Enjoy the rest of the PDT on behalf of our panelists, and certainly in my role as the co-chair for the Intergovernmental Partnership. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great rest of your PDT and a great day today. Take care, and I think that's going to close us out.